Let's go over the OATs test. OATs is one of my 3 foundation labs that I run with all my clients. I love this test. I've been using it for many years. And some people always ask, like, where did you get these 3 foundation labs from? Now, when I started after I graduated from the program that I took many years ago, we're actually coming up on my 9th anniversary doing this in June when I opened Motivated to Heal. So 9 years doing online health coaching. Before that, I was working in person, but I didn't have the labs that didn't have any labs at that time. It was basically very symptom driven. So when I started, I did not use the organic acids test. I was trained with very specific labs. I started using them with clients, didn't like them, didn't find they worked. And over the years, I tried different tests, and the program, the Heal Yourself program, came together based on what was working. So the organic acids test is a very powerhouse lab, but it doesn't work on its own. So it's why it's organic acids blood work foundation with the genetics, because when you take the information together, you see a picture. If you take the information separately, you're missing pieces of the puzzle. So the OATs test, I'm going to show you what all the markers mean. I'm not going to go in depth on the analysis of this particular lab because we only have so much time on these videos. So I want to share my screen. Let's pull up this OATs test. All right, so this first page is yeast, bacterial, and fungal. Yeast and fungal markers, bacterial markers, and mold markers. So you can see here, any of the markers that have the little writing underneath are different species of mold. So a lot of people ask, why don't you run a mycotox test? And the reason why I don't is because I feel there is a very hyper focus on mold. I've seen a lot of people really destroy their lives trying to get to mold-free environments, and I don't believe that that's possible. And when I say destroy their lives, I mean financially they will go bankrupt, going from one house to another, trying to remediate, or selling and then moving, finding more mold, selling and moving, ruining relationships because of their focus on mold. So I'm not saying that mold is not important. I have, with every client that starts, I tell them, if you're concerned about mold in your house, definitely look into that, remediate. But at the same time, from my journey and seeing other clients' journeys, like again, 9 years, I've been doing this a while, close to 1,000 people that I've worked with over the years, close to 10,000 labs now that I've run. And it's recognizing that a healthy body can handle some mold. We actually have less mold now than we did 100 years ago, and we have more sick people now than we did 100 years ago. So what's the common correlation there? Like, what is going on? And it's the fact that our bodies are just so stressed. We're depleted in nutrients and we're burdened with toxins. So the more we heal our bodies, the better it can handle the mold. Now, for me, there was a time I would go into a mold house, I would smell it immediately, I would get immediately sick. And now when I go back to Canada, there's a lot of mold there because there's a lot of leaks in the basements, especially in the old houses because of the flooding with the snow. So very common to get leaks in the basements. I don't have any issues there. There was a time when I was sick and my body was unable to handle toxic load. I would come to Florida, I would get incredibly ill. I now live here all year in the summer, and I would get ill in January when I would come here. So what I have found is the more we repair the detox pathways, the more we heal the body, the more the body is able to tolerate these things, and we're not able to live in a bubble. So that is why one reason I don't run a mycotox test. The other reason why I don't is because I can take a healthy person, which I have done. Like, I've run a lot of labs. So when the mycotox test first came out, I did run it. And I have had so many clients come to me over the years with mycotox tests. So it's not something that I haven't looked at or looked into. It's just something I don't use because it's not telling me the right information. So I experimented. I took healthy people and I ran labs, people who have no trouble being in moldy environments, and they had mold because their body is actively detoxifying the mold, which it should be. There is mold in every environment. You come to Florida, there is mold here. We found mold in our HVAC, and we had a remediation company, and she's like, most people don't remediate this because, it's just part of living in Florida. And realistically, in the summer, the mold is going to still be higher outside than it is inside. And once you remediate, within a year or two, it's going to be back because we live in very intense humidity here. So it's the mold here that we had in our HVAC. It doesn't bother any of us. We're all healthy, but there is mold in our environment. We can't get to mold zero. So this is why I still like the oats test. It does have some mold markers more often than not. People are getting it from food, but if you are concerned, if you are ill, then it is important to either remediate or get to a less mold house. Again, it's very hard to find mold zero. And then what sucks is when you do, you're like, oh my gosh, my dishwasher leaked, or oh my gosh, the washing machine leaked, and boom, you're right back at it again. I remember in our house in Canada, our last house in Canada, we had a company come over. We had the smell in the house, and the company came over, looked for the smell, tried to find the smell, and we didn't realize that he had took the pipe for the washing machine out, and he didn't put it back. And so when I ran the washing machine, and I always do an extra spin and rinse, it all went on the floor, and we did tear up the floor and everything like that. But you want to do what you can, but not to the point where you're going bankrupt or you're losing relationships. And it can become very much a hyper focus. Our goal is to repair the body. Now that was a huge tangent, and I probably will do that more than one time on this test. So we're seeing mold markers, we're seeing yeast markers. You can see this person had some elevated yeast. I don't actively work on killing pathogens for the most part. There are those cases that I will, but I don't do it in the beginning because the body is already taxed. The body is already under a big toxic burden load, and killing pathogens will release more of a toxic load. And so we want to work on the detox pathways first. Now, I might put some support on board to help mitigate this, maybe some probiotics. I like using SIBO-safe probiotics, or some S. boulardii, which is a beneficial yeast that does not colonize in the body. It's gone within 24 hours, and it's just going to crowd out any overgrowth. But when the body is weakened, no matter how much you try to get this down, it will come back. It will just keep coming back. You will create resistance. So why weaken the body by releasing toxins, and why create resistance when it's not going to work? So we put support on board and we do the work. We need to work on rebuilding the body, work on getting it stronger, so that when we do tackle this, which normally we don't need to, it's amazing that once you do strengthen the body and get the body strong enough to tackle the yeast, it will do it all by itself. So here we're seeing some mostly C. diff markers. And when these are elevated, I will often put support on board, especially if there's bacteria. If there's diarrhea involved, then I will get that on board. All right, so the second page is a diagram of the Krebs cycle, which is part of cellular respiration, going back to high school, university, biology. There's some videos you can watch online on cellular respiration. This is happening in mitochondria. This is how our body is creating energy. So this is the Krebs cycle itself. This is just a diagram, and these things have nothing to do with your results. They're just diagrams for learning. This is how your body makes and breaks down dopamine. So that has relevance when we look at some of the markers on the OATs test. So here we're seeing oxalate metabolites. So marker 21 is showing you how much oxalates are being removed from your body. Now, it's not always the greatest marker. I've seen people who are eating spinach and peanuts and almonds, like they're going to a more plant-based diet. They've given up raw dairy, and we see nothing because their body has lost the ability to detoxify the oxalates, and they are building up in their system. And what's really cool, when you start to add in support, then you all of a sudden see the oxalates. And when you start to bring the oxalate levels down, the body's able to start detoxifying again when you give the body the tools to do that. We also endogenously produce oxalates. So when I run genetics, I'm looking at oxalate genes because there are some people who have a lot of oxalate genes. They have poor metabolism genetically. They have endogenous production genetically. And then on top of it, then they start adding in oxalates in overload in their diet, doing things like spinach and almonds, peanuts, and then not only that, they probably had antibiotics, and then a lot of people will give up milk, right? That's one of the, give up gluten, give up milk. It's one of the first things people do, and it's not those foods that are the issue, it's what we're doing to those foods. So I often see very, very high oxalate overload. The next markers, marker 22 and 23, that's part of glycolysis. So that's the first step of cellular respiration. These are the Krebs cycle metabolites. So that's that diagram up here. They're showing you the metabolites down there. And then these are also mitochondrial metabolites. And here, this is the ketones and fatty acids. So it's all about how your body is making energy. And you can see here, this person's either purposely putting themselves into ketosis, which I do see a lot right now. Normally, by the time people come to me and they're tired of the fad diets, they're like, oh my gosh, I've done keto, it worked for a while, then I felt worse. I've done carnivore, worked for a while, then I felt worse. I've done raw vegan, I've done all the things. And I was one of those people who did all the things way back in the day. For a very long time, I have stuck to balanced whole food diet. And it's funny when I watch some of these practitioners that are selling different types of programs and they jump from one fad to another. So, this year they're on carnivore. 2 years ago, they were on ketosis, and they're just going from one fad to another, selling their programs. And here I am, still saying the same, preaching the same. Let's go back to 100 years ago. What were people eating 100 years ago when they were living to 100 versus what are we doing to our food right now where we're all dying very, very young? So this could be somebody putting themselves into ketosis, or this is somebody who's really having a lot of trouble converting fat to fuel. So it's just giving us information about the mitochondria. Now, here we go to neurotransmitter metabolites. And so many people go to practitioners and they see, oh, your serotonin is low. Let's give you serotonin. This is not what this means. This means nothing right now, nothing at all until you know how you're breaking down your neurotransmitters. And that's why we need the full picture of the 3 foundation labs. We get that on the genetics. So I run an ancestry test. It's cheap. It goes through lots of readers and it's going to give me the genes I want. Whereas some of these other labs, you're paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars for, you're missing out on markers. They're very hard to interpret. So I like a good ancestry test and just really quick answers. So here we're looking, when we're looking at dopamine metabolism, we're seeing breakdown. So what your body is breaking down, we're not seeing actual levels in the brain. So we want to look at COMT, and I'm not going to go into this because I only wanted to make this video like 10 minutes. So we're looking at COMT, what your COMT status is on your genetics and correlating it here with the dopamine. And this, I teach this in the Integrative Healing Academy to my students, and this part is one of the toughest things. This needs a whole video on itself, multiple videos, which I have in the IHA, because you have to understand how your body is breaking it down versus what you're seeing here. And that's telling you whether the COMT mutations are active or inactive and what's going on. Now, this here, the conversion of dopamine to epinephrine is run by an enzyme called DBH. So again, we see that on ancestry. And an active mutation will show up like this, where we're seeing poor conversion. So the dopamine to the VMA ratio is off. So you can see that here. So again, this is more science than what I wanted to get into. And here we're looking at our serotonin metabolites. So again, this is not how much serotonin you have in your brain. This is how much you're breaking it down, and we're correlating it with MAO, your MAOA status. And quinolinic acid and kynurenic, I so suck at pronouncing things, acid, this is going to be produced, and there's a diagram down below, I'll show you it. This is produced when the body is having trouble converting tryptophan from food into serotonin. So there's a step that happens, and if you don't have the right precursors or cofactors, or there's yeast, there's oxalates, there's bacteria, there's something there, there's a lack of BH4, something is happening that tryptophan is not going to 5-HTP, it's not going to serotonin, and it's turning into quinolinic acid. And then we will see this ratio higher, or sometimes we see it quite toxic, and it is a neurotoxin. All right, so there is some folate metabolism here. I do not go off of this. I just ignore these two markers. I want to see your genes of methylation. So your methylation genes, MTHFR, BHMT, MTR, MTRR, all of those ones. We want to look at a picture of what's going on with methylation, and then we see the gatekeeper of methylation to the bottom half of the cycle, which is transsulfuration, where that affects the CBS enzyme. So we want to look at all of these enzymes and the mutations there. And then we look at the gatekeeper, which is homocysteine. So homocysteine should be in optimal range, 6 to 7.2. If it's too high, then something is preventing it from converting back into methionine. So either you're looking at the MTHFR, the MTRs, MTRR, or the BHMT. There's something happening there. It's not converting back. And if your homocysteine is too low, normally it is going to be due to an active CBS mutation, but there can be another bottleneck. So whenever I see homocysteine is low, I'm going to run a methylation panel. And I do have another video on the methylation panel itself. It goes over the entire methylation cycle, which is really cool if you're into like nerding out on these labs and your detox pathways. Then check out that video. I also have in my book the diagram of the methylation cycle and in-depth every single phase. I go over every phase of detoxification in my book. And I do have another video on the phases of detox. I got to redo that one because it's quite short. It's one that I have done for TikTok and just repurposed it onto YouTube. All right, so I don't look at this. We're looking at other markers for folate metabolism and methylation. And then here we're seeing some deficiencies in these markers. So we've got like B12, B6, B5. I add in basic support for everybody. Everybody is lacking in basic nutrients. Every single person, because our toxic burden is high. Even somebody like myself who eats mostly clean, has very low toxin load, comparatively speaking to the majority of the population, we still need basic nutrients. So I will choose a B complex for myself, my family, my clients, based on their neurotransmitters. So, you know, whether their brain can tolerate methyl donors and whether their detox pathways need methyl donors, right? So I choose a B complex based on that. So I'm either going to choose one with methyl donors or one without methyl donors. Some people, their brains do not like methyl donors. Their detox pathways need that. So that's common with somebody who's COMT++, and they're not going to tolerate a lot of methyl donors if that's active. And always remember, just because a gene is there does not mean it's active. I'm COMT++++, like multiple COMT++, and for the majority of my life, tolerated no methyl donors. And with all the work that I've been doing on my body and neurofeedback, I have turned that gene off and now can handle methyl donors no problem. But it takes a lot of work to turn off genes. A lot of work, and it doesn't happen in, you know, a few months or taking a supplement for, you know, a few weeks. It can take years to turn those genes off, but it definitely is possible. So I like to supplement with the methyl donors or without the methyl donors. If the person's brain doesn't need it and their detox pathways do, then we microdose methyl donors and we support neurotransmitters significantly before we do that. So we also have vitamin C is almost always low, unless somebody is doing high doses of ascorbic acid, which we do not want to do, because one, ascorbic acid is a preservative. It's why we use it in foods to preserve foods. It kills bacteria and it kills good bacteria. We don't want that. It is synthetic. I like to see vitamin C in a natural form for almost all cases. There's always an almost. There's sometimes when I do use ascorbic acid. Normally when we have a DBH mutation and low copper, then that mutation relies on vitamin C, and it's better primed with the ascorbic acid. But again, there's always a but that but is usually rare. So I like whole food C. You're always going to see this low. It doesn't mean you need thousands and thousands of milligrams of ascorbic acid. Just get some natural whole food C on board. Q10 is there. That's actually part of the electron transport chain. And then we have our N-acetylcysteine, which I love NAC. I do. Cysteine is part of transsulfuration, but when somebody has a CBS mutation, I'd like to confirm that that's not active with a methylation panel before using NAC. I would much rather just use glutathione. Biotin here, I'm not a big fan of high supplement doses of biotin, unless symptom-wise, there's a lot of skin or hair issues. I normally I'm fine with what's in the B complex. So these two, this is called methylation toxic exposure, but for years, this was another glutathione marker. And then they changed it to the methylation toxin exposure, which again, we're looking at methylation on different labs. And so either of these two markers are a good indication glutathione is needed. Ammonia, even when people have genes like MTHFR1 active CBS mutation, then there's the ammonia producing pathogens. You've got H. pylori, you've got Lyme, Prevotella, hydrogen sulfide SIBO is producing sulfate, but sulfate breaks down into ammonia. So this will often be misleading. The body will lose the ability to detoxify that ammonia. The ammonia excess causes brain fog, it causes lethargy, it causes just feeling like crap. It's not a fun thing to have ammonia excess, and we normally do not see this being metabolized until we add in support. Marker 61 is just a marker usually for bacteria, but I one time had a client who did not disclose that they were addicted to aspartame, and I did not find this out until a retest on an oats test, and I'm like, what the heck, why is this still high? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And they told me, and they were wondering why they were having trouble losing weight, because any sweetener, natural or toxic chemical like this one, it does cause insulin resistance, because the body actually releases the insulin in response to the sweet taste. So the body assumes that there will be glucose when you eat something sweet, because never in history would we go and eat things that are not right. Like, never would we go and eat aspartame 100 years ago, or would we go and be like eating tons of stevia and monk fruit and all of these things. So it's not natural to us. Our body should, sweet taste equals glucose, release insulin, and then it's like the boy who cried wolf. And so the insulin's released and the glucose isn't there. And so the body's like, okay. And then you do it again, and the body releases the insulin. Eventually it stops releasing insulin. It's like, there's no glucose there. So when you do consume glucose, the body's like, no, I don't believe you. There's no glucose there. And then we get the insulin resistance. And what's amazing is I have been seeing this pattern. Like, I've got all these people in the past few years coming to me where they're on these low carb diets. They're either on a candida diet or ketosis or carnivore, and they're all insulin resistant. And they're like, why is this happening? Why I'm low carb? And then the journal Cell released an article on this, a study on it. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that's why. So what I had been seeing for the past few years, since these diets have really become these big fat diets, is this insulin resistance. So it's pretty crazy. So here we're looking at some amino acid metabolites. When we see a lot of low levels, I like to add in digestive support. I'm usually adding in digestive support anyway in the form of digestive enzymes. I don't use betaine or HCl because they do affect methylation. And if H. pylori is present, it will cause it to proliferate and dive deeper. So it's not something that I use. There's so many other ways to affect the methylation cycle without using that. And I have a whole video on increasing your stomach acid naturally if you are somebody who's doing betaine or HCl. This is actually a marker of vitamin D, but I like to look at the VDR TAC mutation combined with vitamin D levels in the blood. And so then if we continue scrolling down, these are just like examples of what the markers mean. So you want to be in this orange box closer to the midline. That's where you want to be. For a lot of these markers, like when we go up to the first page, if you see low markers, that's fine. I'm not worried about that. High markers are not good. The same with the oxalate markers. We don't want to see high. The same with the mitochondrial markers. We don't want to see high. Neurotransmitter markers are different. It all depends on how your genes are, how you're breaking down your neurotransmitters. And then again, these ones we don't want to see high. Here we want to see them all closer to mid-range in this little orange-ish yellow box. And these ones, again, we want to see mid-range and we want to see mid-range. So that is the oats test. If you continue scrolling down, then they do have this diagram here of how your body is making serotonin. So tryptophan is supposed to convert to 5-HTP if you have stress, infections, lack of cofactors. then it produces the quinolinic acid. And then again, another diagram here on how different species of Clostridia is affecting your dopamine breakdown synthesis also. All right, and I don't really go off of anything they say on the interpretation. I've been doing this for a long time.